I guess we can never know because other side will say this in absolute term.
Very like
Yeah.
polar. There's a
Yeah.
fine line,
Because
strong line rather.
what should happen is that they should say something, but conditionally, not in absolute terms. You don't say that life was perfect during martial law because that's absolute. That's not true.
No.
It has to be conditional. You also can say that there were no human rights violations during that time because again,
Exactly.
it's absolute. I mean, the Supreme Court themselves recognize that there were violations during that time.
And it shouldn't be thought of as a whole black and white thing.
Yes, yes, because politics is
Not.
it's never black
It's
and white.
a lot of grays.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. You're watching At the Backdoor. I'm one of your hosts for today, Reese, and we have here James. Hello, James.
Hi, Reese.
So glad for you to be here during this rainy day, no? So today we are going to be talking about historical revisionism versus historical distortion. But before that, James, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Reese. So my name is James. I'm a legal consultant based in Makati City, and I've been engaged in politics for most of my life, mainly through my dad. So I can say that I know a thing or two about the topic for today.
Yeah, definitely. Enough for us to have a great conversation on
Yes,
it.
yes.
Yes. So, can you first start off by introducing these concepts, historical revisionism and historical distortion? I understand that some of our viewers may be familiar with it, but I think a refresher would help. No?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with historical revisionism.
Okay.
So the idea of historical revisionism is that you are revising an old historical fact because there's new evidence that popped up. Evidence can be in the form of, I don't know, historical document, or maybe a group of historians agree.
I see.
There's a general consensus that this needs to be changed.
All right.
Okay. In contrast, historical negationism or historical distortionism is when you purposely try to change history so that it may serve you or some other purpose.
Like a certain agenda, for
Yes,
example.
yes.
All right, because I see on social media that people tend to use the term no historical revision as a bad thing.
If you think about it, it's not because you are pursuing truth. You have the evidence to back it up. You have the general consensus of experts in the field.
All right.
And you're changing it because you want the truth to appear, right?
I see.
It's not like you are revising it for your own purposes. It's more of you are clarifying what actually happened.
I see. So it's basically history progressing with
Yes,
new
yes.
found evidence.
Yes.
And it just so happens that it's kind of confused with historical distortion, which there's also a term I've seen, which is historical denialism.
Yes.
Is that the same thing as historical distortion?
Well, yeah, at that point it's semantics, but yeah, it's the same. Historical distortion, negation, denial. It really depends on how you intend to use it, but it's more or less the same. Yes.
Why do you think people have all of this confused then?
Well, social media, since it's all on the internet, right?
Oh,
There's bound to be some misinterpretation
mm-hmm.
with regard to the words that they read or see because there's no context. It's like when you send a text message, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you send a text message to your friend saying "ingat ka."
Okay.
It can either mean that I sincerely hope that you take care of yourself, or it's a threat.
Ingat ka.
Yes, there's no context because it's a text message, right? So I think it's the same with the internet, social media, because most of the time people just read the headline. It's just the headline, and then they will react.
So they don't seem to do any further research on.
Well, not research, more like if you read the headline, read the rest so that you will know what the writer is trying to communicate.
I
That's it.
see.
It's not like you are limiting yourself to just the headline, because a headline can mean a lot of things. And if you know SEO, for example,
Okay.
the purpose of a headline is to grab your attention. So more often than not, they would use like a catchy, controversial headline to hook you in.
How have you personally seen historical revisionism or historical distortion like in place here in the Philippines?
Okay, so for historical revisionism, I guess a good example would be how Spain transferred the Philippines to the US. This is something that people get wrong all the time. And
Really?
so basically what happened was the Spaniards held us for over 300 years. And in the 1800s, 1890s, the revolutionaries were about to defeat them. They were
Yeah.
close to defeating them because Spain was having trouble in other parts of the world. They just lost Mexico, and they were
I see.
losing other territories because they had a war with the US. So they couldn't defend Philippines well na from the revolutionaries, the Filipino fighters. But Spain didn't want to make it appear that they lost to Filipinos because their thinking is that Europeans are higher than Filipinos, right?
Yes.
Actually, the point of their imperialist principle was that they are colonizing these countries because they want to help them develop. That's their idea, because in their mind, we were not developed.
Yes.
So to lose to natives that were undeveloped would be shameful.
They just couldn't do that.
Yeah, they couldn't do that. So what they did was they sold the Philippines to the US, but they didn't want it to make it so that they simply gave up.
So it was like a dignified
Yeah.
exit, so to
So if you're familiar with what they call the mock battle in Intramuros, where they went inside Intramuros with the Americans, and then they locked the door, and then they did a mock battle. Basically, they just shot guns or something without, you know.
Oh yes, I remember learning this in history.
Yeah. They did a mock battle. They didn't let Filipinos enter. At that time, Filipinos were thinking, okay, oh, they're fighting. When in fact, they already struck a deal that they sold the Philippines.
So it was all staged.
Yeah, it was all staged. The resulting treaty was Treaty of Paris, right?
Exactly.
But all that time, during that time, we think that we beat them. And Spain was saying, no, you didn't beat us. We sold you to the US. The US beat us. Get what I mean?
Okay.
They were saying in Europe at that time that no, we weren't beaten by natives. We were beaten by a power like the US.
I see.
Yeah. So right now it's all coming to light because we're all, it's modern education.
Exactly.
We have smarter historians. So it's now all coming to light that this is what happened. You get what I mean? So that's a good I think that's a good example of revisionism in the sense that Spain was claiming this as the historical fact. But now that we are capable of thinking for ourselves,
Yes, and
we
doing
are saying that
research.
no, that's not historical fact because this is what happened. Yeah. So we are changing, we are revising history because we know better. We have,
Newfound evidence.
new evidence. We're now, times have changed. We are smarter. Now, if you think of historical distortion or historical negation, you know why after the Spaniards came to the Philippines, we have no history
Why is that?
after they landed.
What do you mean,
Because-
like history prior
Yeah,
to
because, if you
colonization?
look, history after colonization, and maybe prior also, because again, if you remember what I mentioned earlier, right? The main goal or the main idea of imperialism is that you are conquering these natives because they don't know any better. They are undeveloped, and our goal is to help you become developed. Unfortunately, when the Spaniards came here, they saw that we had writing,
Exactly.
they saw that we had culture, art, etc. So what they did was, in order to justify their
What they did.
colonization,
Yeah.
they destroyed everything, they burned everything, so that they can say back in Europe that these are,
Savages.
natives that didn't have, a system in place.
Yeah. We
So
even had a government
yeah,
system,
yeah.
no?
So that's why our history during that time is very
Little.
Yeah, very little.
I see.
I mean, we saved some of them, the Alibata writings, etc. But
Yes.
it was more than that. So basically, what Spain was doing at the time was they're trying to distort history by
Okay.
erasing our history. You know what
For
I
their
mean?
agenda.
Yeah,
And do you know this quote that says history is written by the winners?
yeah.
Is
Yes, of
that like
course.
the historical
Yeah, yeah.
distortion model?
When you think about history, you normally just take note of important events. So normally, in any society, important events will usually involve wars
Mm-hmm.
or revolutions, etc. And in those instances, there are competing parties where the result would be there's a winner and there's a loser.
Yes.
So who will write the history after that event has passed? It's the winner.
Exactly.
And since we're human beings, we have the tendency to be biased when we write history. It's the same in every country. It's the same in every society. Like if you think of, for example, the Punic Wars that happened in Greece, ancient Greece. The
Okay.
Persians lost, so the Greeks wrote the history saying that the Persians were evil conquerors, etc. When, if you think about it, if they won, if the Persians won, it would have been
Something
them
else.
saying that it was the Greeks who were savages. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? Yeah.
So there are so many instances of these kinds of revisionism and distortion.
Yes.
And they trickle down into society now,
Yes.
even. So can you give an example of how we see it today?
Today. So can we talk about the burning issue that is trending in all of social media?
I actually haven't come across that.
Okay, so there's this issue with what really happened during martial law, right?
Okay.
The conversation is very it's very confusing because people say a lot of things and you don't know which one is saying something constructive or saying something factual or whatever. And there's really a lack of resources to base your statements, honestly. But what I can say is that people seem to forget what was happening in the 1970s, 1980s. Do you know what was happening? I mean, all around the world, not just Philippines.
I'm actually not.
1970s, 1980s.
Do you mean
Okay.
like the Vietnam War? I
No,
think
no, no.
70s?
Something bigger than that. Okay.
Oh, really?
So what was happening during that time was what we call the Cold War, right?
Yes.
US versus USSR. So the reason why the war in Vietnam happened was because of uh, US and USSR fighting over it. It was communist versus capitalist.
I see.
Same thing. The Korean War started because of US and USSR. So at that time, we didn't live through it, right? We were not born, right?
No, not yet.
But at that time, if you read history about the Cold War, the threat was really serious. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to justify the foundation for declaring martial law, right? But what I'm saying is that the threat of nuclear war, the threat of civil war, was very serious because look at what happened to Vietnam, to Korea, right? And look what happened when they placed nuclear weapons in Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis happened.
I heard about that.
So Marcos thought of declaring martial law because he was saying that there's a communist threat, which there really was. But to what extent that threat was, we don't know. It might also be possible, and I'm just saying this not as conclusively as I want it to be because again I don't know.
Yeah.
It's possible that the human rights violations that they did during martial law were against communists. But again, we don't know because over the years they changed. The parties said a lot of things. They argued about certain things, and now all of us were confused on who to believe. Was with the Philippines great during martial law?
Depends.
I don't know.
What do
Yeah,
you-
because honestly, whenever I talk to cab drivers who lived during that time,
Okay.
they would always say that, yeah, it was good, blah, blah, blah. If you didn't do anything illegal, you were okay. And if you think about it, that person had no reason to lie, right? That person had no reason to say something that would push forward a certain agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's a cab driver. His goal every day is to earn enough to put food on the table. That's it.
Exactly.
They don't have political influence. So maybe they said that because it was the truth. But then if you talk to others, they would say a different thing. So I guess the proper conclusion was that some things happened during that time, some things didn't happen. And I guess we'll never know because the people who were alive during that time either refuse to talk about it or they say a different thing. Like for example, you have Enrile and Ramos, right? Who were close to Marcos during that time.
Yeah, they were.
I always felt like since they were privy to the Marcos administration,
Mhm.
that they knew a lot of things.
Mhm.
But I always felt like they didn't say.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, they didn't say what they knew because they were sticking to a certain agenda. They had a new
Exactly.
theme. There are also some writers who publish articles online that lived during martial law and they say certain things like Ninoy wanted this, wanted to inherit from Marcos, the position, stuff like that. But again, those are things that we can never really know. The issue right now with people saying that there's historical negation, I think in a way it's yes, it's correct because there are some people who are saying that the human rights violations never happened during martial law, which they did.
Yeah.
It did happen because I've spoken to some retired policemen who did serve during that time, and they said yes. Sometimes if you go to a certain place and you look suspicious, they would take you. That happened. That happened during that time, right? There's historical negation in the sense that they are saying that life was difficult at that time when in fact it was not that bad. And there's on the
Not
other
that
side,
bad in what sense?
not that bad in the sense that it's not like North Korea.
Or like the entire population was.
Because North Korea, you have to follow certain rules. You can't say certain words against certain people, or else you will get punished. Right. So in the Philippines, I think what started this perspective of mine is when I was reading a book on entrepreneurship about a certain author, and he was saying that during the 1970s, 1980s, when there was a crash, I think, in the economy, he said that he had to close down some of his Haagen-Dazs branches.
Mm-hmm.
But there was an anecdote in that book that kind of piqued my interest. He said that he wanted to continue investing in Asia because he mentioned a lot of things, right? But there was one line there that kind of I found interesting.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the Philippines is doing great under the leadership of President Ferdinand Marcos.
Okay.
This is a guy who's just a businessman who doesn't have an agenda, and he's not that big as Warren Buffett because I forgot about his name. But why would he say something like that if it's not true, right? So maybe at that time it wasn't that bad as people make it out to be, but it wasn't perfect as well. What really eats me up inside is that we will likely never know because if you acquiesce to a certain side, the other side will get angry, and I think they refuse to admit one or the other. So we as a people, of course, we deserve to know what really went down.
Exactly.
But I guess we can never know because other side will say this in absolute terms.
Yes, it's very like
yeah.
polar. There's a
Yeah.
fine line,
Because
strong line rather.
what should happen is that they should say something, but conditionally, not in absolute terms. You don't say that life was perfect during martial law because that's absolute. That's not true.
No.
It has to be conditional. You also can't say that there were no human rights violations during that time because again,
Exactly.
it's absolute. I mean, the Supreme Court themselves recognized that there were violations during that time.
And it shouldn't be thought of as a whole black and white thing.
Yes, because politics is
Not.
it's never black
It's
and white.
a lot of grays.
Yeah. Again, I said when President Obama was interviewed before, he said that politics is there's a lot of ambiguities, because it's possible that I mean, this is his words, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said that terrorists can be evil but still love their children, love their families. Certain people can push for a certain agenda, but they would support this other agenda. And I guess that's what makes politics dirty.
Do you think that these two main teams that
Yeah,
we
we
see
all
on
know
social
what we're
media,
talking about.
do you think that we could ever come to like a conclusion together, that we could work together to move forward as like people of the Philippines?
I won't say no,
Okay.
because I still think that eventually we as a country will find our path and become developed and wealthy. I also say that because the people who were alive during that time, during that era, the martial law era, eventually they're going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who will replace them are the sons, grandsons, granddaughters, daughters. And we can only hope that these people who will inherit from them will have a different perspective, a different state of mind. Let bygones be bygones, forgive,
Be
and
open.
cooperate. Yeah, but let's see. We can only hope, right? Because right now we're seeing a new generation of politicians coming from both sides. Maybe, just maybe, they set aside their differences and say that, you know what, this happened years ago. Let's just focus on building this country and making it better. Maybe we can unite. I don't know. I guess I'm being an
In
optimist.
the end, we won't know what will
Yeah, we
happen in
won't
the
know. We
future.
won't
We can
know.
only hope.
Yes, we can only hope. And I think that's all we need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for lending your time and being here today, James. I think we all had like a very fruitful conversation, no?
Don't hate me.
Oh no, definitely. This is a conversation for us to kind of share ideas.
No, I think if you guys have thoughts, just share them and let's discuss them.
Exactly. Let's all be open to discussion and learn new information and come together and work together. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. If you like this video, please give us a like, subscribe, share, comment. Once again, this is James. I'm your host, Reese. You're watching At the Backdoor.